Hello and welcome. It's Thursday and you're tuned in to the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. Tomorrow, we have Nate and Kaylee Ratterman that are going to join us from the Museum of Shadows in Elmwood, Nebraska. We're going to talk about some of the creepy items that they have in this haunted museum, in this 127-year-old building that was once used for embalming. They've got haunted artifacts and objects of all types and sorts, and we're going to hear the stories behind some of these items, plus a brand new Theater of the Mind. That's tomorrow on the best in paranormal talk radio. Tonight, we're going to take a look at our Bigfoot friend. This is something that fascinates me and many of the listeners around the world. Bigfoot. What is this creature? What are all of the theories behind it? And we're going to hear about a history of wildmen, gorillas, and other hairy monsters in the Keystone State tonight. Bigfoot in Pennsylvania, our topic. Timothy Renner is our guest. He is an illustrator, author, and folk musician living in Pennsylvania. He has been a guest with us before on Darkness Radio. He's here for the first time on Beyond the Darkness. Timothy, welcome to the show.
How you doing?
Doing great. Thanks a lot for joining us this evening.
Oh, happy to be here.
What spurred your interest in researching and really looking into the history of Bigfoot in that area?
It was really my last book, which you had me on to talk about. And that concerned just basically three counties. It was York, Adams, and Lancaster counties. And I found so many Bigfoot reports, far more than I ever thought I would, that I just figured I'd keep going.
Okay.
Through the whole state.
Now, just to remind listeners, this may be the first time they've heard of you. Have you had a Bigfoot experience?
I'm going to say no, with a maybe in parentheses.
Okay. All right. Well, explain to us what that foggy answer means.
I've had some things in the woods, like stone throwing and wood knocks and stone clacking and the skunky smell and the hair on the back of my neck standing up, but I've never seen a creature to my knowledge, although I saw something very fast and very big, but I still couldn't identify exactly what it was. So you can't identify 100% that was a Bigfoot, but you witnessed something large, bipedal, and hairy moving through the woods. It was quadrupedal, but... quadrupedal. Bigfoot are known to go down on all fours at sometimes. Really? It was huge. It was huge, whatever it was. It was as big as a moose, and it was in southern Pennsylvania. We don't have moose, so. It was as big as a moose on all fours? I believe so. It was so quick. It was so fast that it's hard to even talk about. I know the thought that came into my head, I've seen a moose in the wild. My friend used to live in Massachusetts, and I've actually seen a bull moose. And the thought that came to my head was moose just because of the size and the sort of awkward gait it had. But obviously we don't have moose in southern Pennsylvania. All right. This thing goes hauling past. What did you do? I mean, you're a researcher. Did you start to try to chase it down to see what you could find? Or was the sheer size of it enough to intimidate you to think, all right, that's close enough for me? Well, it was actually pretty strange because it was in a different area from the area I had heard the rock clacks and everything I mentioned before. And I, having not seen a thing that day with the rock clacks, I was terrified. I mean, it was all I could do to keep from running. I just really had a frightening feeling. This time I actually saw something, and for whatever reason, I didn't think twice. I couldn't run. It was in such an area, it was just overgrown. It was really not a pleasant area to be in. Thorns and poison and copperhead snakes and everything all around. So I couldn't really take off running after it, but I really didn't think twice and just kind of followed along the way it went. Really? I didn't find anything. Okay. Yeah, I didn't find anything, but it was what's your goal, Timothy? If you go through and you chase something down as big as a moose on all four, what are you going to do if you come face to face with it? Well, that's the thing. It was only later when I started thinking about it. I kind of sat down that night and it hit me all at once. I was like, what did I do? Yeah. I guess I was just wanted to see what it was, but, I don't know what the end game is there. Curiosity, I guess. Man, you lost me at copperheads. If I know they're roaming around in that area,
It would be great if they could just set up a Bigfoot territory with like a ball crawl and a bouncy house. That's about the extent of my interest in going out of doors, because I don't want to run into all of the rest of the icky things that are out there.
I came out covered in ticks that day. It was really wasn't a pleasant day.
So it's not real romantic and sexy to be a Bigfoot researcher, is it?
Yeah, and I don't even know if I'm a researcher so much as an enthusiast. I mean, I'm not great at keeping records, and I don't honestly. My feelings about the creature are I'm probably not going to add anything new to the canon. It'd be great if I did, but it's such a mystery and it's such a puzzle that I think very few people get to even add a new piece to the puzzle.
Well, the title of the book, Bigfoot in Pennsylvania, A History of Wild Men, Gorillas, and Other Hairy Monsters in the Keystone State. Let's start breaking this down. The history of wild men. Was this what was referred to from like Native American tribes? Is that how they described the Bigfoot, or is this a totally different beast unto itself?
No, it's basically a Bigfoot. Before they were called Bigfoot, that name came into use in the 1950s and really didn't even get popular probably to the 1970s. And Sasquatch was a little bit before that, but that was really on the West Coast. If you look at the East Coast, before the name Bigfoot and Sasquatch become popular, what they called them in the 1800s in newspaper articles most of the time was wild men. And it gets confusing because there were also what they would refer to as wild men, meaning a feral human or a usually like a homeless guy or something.
Sure.
And I did run across a lot of those reports. I didn't put those in the book. If I could tell for sure it was a human, they were talking, they were taken to a county home, they were otherwise captured. It didn't go in the book. I left it out. And for every 10 reports that seemed to be a Bigfoot creature by the size or the other behavior, there was, for every one Bigfoot, one that would happen to sound like a Bigfoot by behavior or size or otherwise description, there was probably 10 or 20 that were definitely humans that I didn't put in the book.
All right. So, well, talk to me. How far back in history were you able to locate stories of wild men that would match the Bigfoot story?
I go back to the 1830s in the book. So that's pretty early as far as newspapers.
Wow. Yeah, 1830s. What can you tell me about that first encounter that you stumbled upon, and what stood out about it that made you realize that this was more than just a homeless guy or a feral human that grew up in the wilderness?
Well, this was they called it the whistling wild boy of the woods. It was a small-sized creature. They said he represented the animal as we have it through a third person as having the appearance of a child, 7 or 8 years old, though somewhat slimmered and covered entirely with hair. He saw it while picking berries, walking toward him erect and whistling like a person. After recovering from the fright, he is said to have pursued it, but it ran off with such speed, whistling as it went, that he could not catch it. He said it ran like the devil, and he continued to call it after that name. So that's what we call in Pennsylvania an albatwitch creature. They're small, kind of thin, hair-covered. They're usually, I don't know if they're exactly in the Bigfoot family, but to me that has all the markings of an albatwitch.
An albatwitch? That's something I've never heard of before.
Yeah, they're known by different names. It's basically what they call the little people. There's different names all over the country. Our local one is the albatwitch, but I think they're puckwudgies in New England. Yeah, and they have different names all across the country.
But now we know that there are children that have been afflicted with this werewolf syndrome, that their entire bodies are covered in hair. That there is that possibility. It could have just been a child that was wild and let loose because of that strange affliction, especially in the 1830s. I'm sure families just didn't want, they would have thought that the mother maybe was consorting with the devil to have a child that looked like that.
Possibly. There's another sighting of the creature in the same article, so which happens a few years later. So either there's more than one hairy child, or he didn't grow.
Okay. Well, talk to me. What was that second experience like? Who witnessed that, and what did they see?
That was witnessed by another person. They were in the same general area. It was in Pennsylvania near the New York state line,
It was a boy, he said he was 16 years old. He took with him a gun and was told by his father to shoot anything he might see except persons or cattle. After working a while, he heard some person, a little brother he supposed, coming towards him, whistling quite merrily. It came within a few rods of him and stopped. He said it looked like a human being, covered with black hair, about the size of his brother, who was 6 or 7 years old. His gun was some little distance off, and he was very much frightened. He, however, got his gun and shot at the animal, but trembled so that he could not hold still. The strange animal, just as his gun went off, stepped behind a tree and then ran off whistling as before. The father said the boy came home very much frightened. When thinking about the animal he had seen, he would use, to his own words, burst out a-crying.
Whistling, right? That's a whole new aspect. We've heard of the whoops and the cries and the howls, but whistling.
Well, the little people, or the Alwitch, we get reports of them whistling. And in fact, the local people, they're kind of centered around the Susquehanna River. And I've actually heard local legends where people say, if you memorize a certain whistle, you can call them out. They have what they call a welcome whistle. And it's a very complex series of whistles that they say, so the folklore goes, if you memorize it, you can actually call the creatures out.
Really? Okay. And do you have any experts who believe that they know how to call these creatures?
I've not met someone yet. This is, like I said, this is kind of folklore. I read it in a book, so
okay.
I'd be happy to meet someone who could do it.
No doubt. All right, so these Wildmen encounters going back to 1830. So these are these smaller, childlike versions, the little people.
That was just the one. That's
right.
The only actual little person report I have. It just happens to be the oldest one in the book.
Well, talk to me about some more of the larger bipedal creatures that started being reported on, and when did they start showing up in our history?
They're throughout. They go back to medieval times. You can find references to wild men in medieval documents, Wadwoes in England. Of course, the Norse had their trolls. It seems like wherever we live, there's always been these big hairy creatures that live in the woods, more or less beside us. But the bigger creatures come out here and there, and you can find. I just have some examples here. This isn't the earliest one of the big creature, but this is one from 1874. And it says, he is, according to the statements to those who have seen him, nearly 7 feet high and weighs over 250 pounds. He walks generally on all fours, is almost covered with hair, gives unearthly yells, and makes all kinds of gestures. His hands and feet are double the size of an ordinary man, and he presents an altogether horrible appearance. He approaches the cabins of settlers in the mountains, carries off their pigs and sheep, and with a demonic laugh disappears in the dense forest. The brave spirits of the neighborhood go gunning for him, but whenever they come in sight of the monster, he just gives a yell and a jump, and before the hunters have time to pull the trigger, he is gone.
Now, are these being reported as actual news stories and encounters, or again, does this kind of fall into the folklore?
These are being reported as news stories, and it's pretty interesting. The tone of the newspaper articles differs. Usually, if it was reported in one newspaper, another newspaper will pretty much kind of try to debunk and deride it and say, they're ridiculous. So you get this odd mix of debunking, which sounds a lot like modern debunking, along with some reporting. And it does seem like some of the reports are probably exaggerated, or they'll put in little things that bits of humor and so forth, but a lot of them name names. They're from small town papers. They name specific people, and a few of the reports that are near me, I've actually looked up the people. I've done the genealogy on them. I've found where they're buried, so they are real people.
Okay, all right. So you're digging up more and more of these cases and kind of filling into the Wildmen. What about you use the word gorilla in this? Were there gorilla sightings throughout Pennsylvania?
Well, what happens is, what it was in the 1800s, people really didn't have a word for it. When they'd see something upright that looked kind of like a person covered in hair, they just said, oh, it's a wild man. That's a man who's wild. And a lot of times even they misunderstand evolution after Darwin, and they'll say, the guy, he turned from society, so he grew hair all over his body, like Darwin says, which isn't, that's really not what evolution says happens. But around 1900, the late 1800s, 1900, what happens is the discovery of the mountain gorilla. And people start seeing pictures of gorillas, and some zoos have them, although they're very rare at this point. But some zoos have them. They'll see pictures in newspapers and so forth. So now people begin to have something to call it other than a wild man. So right around 1890, 1900, the reports shift, and you start finding a lot less wild man reports, and all of a sudden you get gorilla reports. Now, there are no gorillas in Pennsylvania.
I didn't know if maybe you had a turned-over circus wagon or something that went awry once, and a pair made it out, and that would be something that became part of your legend and lore.
Well, that's what they claim. I mean, that's the newspapers say, oh, this must be an escaped gorilla. The problem is, like I said, there weren't that many gorillas in the United States at the time. The ones that were here were all named, they were all accounted for, and they were reported on almost like celebrities. Their activities were reported in the paper. It's not pleasant, but some of them were taught to smoke and drink beer, so they would report like, oh, this gorilla smokes cigars and so forth. So you do find that the papers say, oh, there's an escaped gorilla running through Pennsylvania, but you can never find the story of the circus that lost their gorilla. The other thing that happens is this is in January, and a lot of these reports are in December and January in Pennsylvania. It's very cold. Gorillas are not a cold species. They're a tropical species, and they would be in a strange land with strange food, and it just really doesn't add up that they could be gorilla. Not only that, the behavior really matches modern Bigfoot reports. One of the earliest gorilla reports, where they refer to it as a gorilla, is from 1881, the earliest ones that I have, and it features the creature attacking dogs, which, if you've heard modern reports, Bigfoot and dogs do not get along.
Right.
So this is from January 3rd, 1881. A monster gorilla is reported to have made its appearance on Jimmy Brunt's farm, Valley Township, Armstrong County. The other night, the animal visited the house of John Emery and captured a dog, which he carried away into the woods. Subsequently, it is said the animal attacked and badly wounded a gigantic hound belonging to Mr. Con Knowlton. A party is organizing to effect its capture.
Is there a follow-up? I mean, to have a story that dynamic, do they ever go back and say, we attempted, there were fleeting visions of this creature, or shots were fired but nothing was brought down?
Some of them you'll get that. The later ones especially. In the 1920s, there was this kind of wave of gorilla sightings that goes across Pennsylvania. It starts kind of outside Pittsburgh, moves to the center of the state, goes down to Gettysburg. You can really almost follow the movement of the creatures from place to place if that's indeed what they're doing. It seems like that's what they're doing. Eventually it ends up in northern Maryland. And the reports go from paper to paper. They say specific people who saw them and what happened with the creatures and what they were doing and so forth. But a lot of these older reports, it's just the papers that are out there. It's real piecemeal. What the records you can find and the newspaper search is imperfect. So you tend to get to these little stories that pop up here and there.
Interesting stuff, right? The gorilla aspect of this, that there was even that possibility. Now, would they ever show in these reports that the creatures seem to consort with one another, or that they would see some of these small whistling wild men along with the big gorilla-like creatures, or were they always separate in encounters?
Every report I've had, both modern and old, of those little people, the Albatwitz creatures, they're never with adults, which is another reason why I think they're separate creatures. They're never seen with the the giant Bigfoot.
That makes it weird unto itself, right? So if these things actually exist and live out there, how are all of these different beings avoiding capture, avoiding, even accidentally? You'd figure at some point one's going to have a heart attack and drop dead where it shouldn't have.
If we're talking about an ape in the woods, which I'm not sure we are. Well, I just think there's more to the mystery than that. You're going to ask me, what is it? The answer is, I really don't know. I only know that they've been next to us forever. People have seen them forever. I don't know if there's some kind of echo from our past. I don't know if you've heard, there's a book called Them and Us where the guy puts a theory out that Neanderthal hunted us. And a lot of people think that these may be some kind of memory that that's been passed down.
So that these may be more of a residual haunting, in effect?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people that believe that. I think that maybe that's part of it, but I also believe something's leaving footprints and hair and scat behind. It's a very difficult problem. That's why I said before, I don't think it's getting solved. I don't think we're going to end up with a body. I could be wrong. I could be wrong about any of this. And if someone brings in a body one day, I will absolutely say, I was wrong. Look, they got a body. And I won't be incredibly surprised. But to me, it just doesn't seem like we're going to get a body. I don't think so.
Right. It seems nearly impossible unless a hunter happens to get them lined up right and is willing to take that shot without the fear of repercussion, which I think, it'll be interesting to see what happens and how that person will be met with if and when that shot is ever taken.
Yeah, and he better hope he does it in with one shot, because whatever they are, they have a culture of vengeance. And I mean, there's some of the articles I have bear it out. If there's one in particular, a boy, I think he was 14, he shot it. The creature got him 2 weeks later. Went and followed him home.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, give us. I need to know that story.
Sure.
What was this all about?
It was a boy. I will read the article. Let me just bring it up here. I have them in order. So, okay, this is from 1920. Like, this is in that wave of guerrilla stories I was telling you about. And this is 1920 from the Altoona Tribune, December 15th. Giant gorilla creates fear in Snyder County. Animal believed to have escaped from carnival breaks boy's arm during attack. Had previously been wounded. Visits Bolig Farm quite often. The appearance of a man-ape or gorilla in the mountains of Snyder County has caused great excitement among the residents of the section where the animal was seen. The big ape was first seen 3 weeks ago by Samuel Bolig of Miser, a small town in Snyder County. The animal is supposed to be one that escaped some time ago from a carnival and which has since been living in the mountains of that section of the state. Samuel and Margaret Bolig, the children of Charles Bolig, were gathering kindling wood one night in November with the light of a search lamp when a huge animal about 7 feet tall and that stood up like a man was discovered by the children within the circle of light. It looked to them like a huge monkey, and when discovered, dropped on all fours and ambled away, soon disappearing in the darkness. A week later, the same animal was discovered in a cornfield on the Bolig farm, which is at the foot of the mountain. Samuel procured a .32 caliber rifle and took a shot at the huge man creature, evidently wounding it as it fell at the shot, rolling over several times on the ground. The boy and his father trailed the wounded ape some distance by the blood, but were unable to overtake it, and at length gave up the pursuit. On Monday night of the present week, the strange creature made its third appearance at the Bolig farm. Charles Bolig was engaged in chopping wood by the light of a lantern when the ape approached near enough to be seen. The son ran to the house and procured the rifle, but before he could shoot the gorilla, it viciously attacked him, knocking him down and breaking his arm, and was finally driven away by the father. The lad lay on the ground in an unconscious condition. He was taken to the house and soon recovered his senses, and it was found that he was not seriously injured. He suffered much from shock, but is expected to fully recover in a short time. A large number of men armed with rifles started out to hunt the animal. About 100 Lewistown hunters are scouring the narrows in the surrounding country toward the Snyder County line in the hope of getting a shot at the huge creature and killing it, as its presence has caused the greatest consternation in that section, the gorilla being very dangerous on account of its great size, strength, and savage nature.
That's chilling, isn't it? I mean, to read something in an account that detailed from that time and realizing these people took it very seriously. So this wasn't just, it's not the current day where people are looking for that 15 minutes of fame. This is a time when it was probably almost frightening and embarrassing to admit that this happened to you and your family.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And like I said, a lot of times other papers will call people out. A lot of times they'll solve them. I print some of the articles in the book where they'll solve them with the most ridiculous things. They'll say one of them said it was a raccoon. there's no one who's confusing a raccoon with an 8-foot tall hairy giant. But the thing is, in almost every case when these papers present these solutions, the gorilla was seen again after sometimes it's unfortunate of the time, but there's some undercurrents of racism to some of the articles. It's just the nature of the time. So a lot of times they'll capture an African American and they'll say, oh, we got the person,
Wildmen, right.
This was the person that was doing it. He was scaring everybody. But then there'll be further sightings in later dates in the paper. People will see the gorilla afterwards and so forth.
That's an astounding part of our history too. I mean, what a weird time to be alive and have all of these theories and beliefs going on, and the way that the African Americans were treated at that point, like animals. You would see that would make sense to them because that was their mindset.
Yeah, and there's the racism runs from just blatant, outright, like shocking, to kind of weird, like insidious racism, to the point where, like, one of the articles says only the African American population or only those with African descent can see these gorillas, which again is directly contrasted by the very next article where it says a white farmer, saw the creature. But it's just the time they were written in. I put a disclaimer in the book for that reason. I said, these articles are in here for the information they contain, not as an endorsement of that kind of backward thinking of the time.
Right. Let's before we have to go to break, give me another one of your favorite stories from the golden olden days of the strange encounters you were able to dig up.
Well, there's one from 1888 that reads exactly like a missing 411 account. This could come out of one of David Paulides' books.
All right, let's hear it.
This is Lost or Kidnapped, Mysterious Disappearance of Little Florence Hughes. Friday forenoon, Florence Hughes, the 2-year-old daughter of John Hughes, an employee of the Bradford Oil Company, who lives on the Rutherford farm, was playing in that vicinity with 2 other children. The little one's playmates left her alone while they were seeking flowers in a clump of underbrush nearby, and when they returned, she was gone. Mr. and Mrs. Hughes were immediately notified and instituted a rigorous search, but could find no trace of the missing one. All day long, the fruitless search was kept up. In the evening, a crowd started out from the city, swelling the number in the searching party to over 100. Every nook and spot in the woods and the fields within a radius of 1 mile was examined closely, but without success. The lost babe could not be found. The parents are nearly distracted and have the keen sympathy of many friends in their trouble. It is believed that the child has been kidnapped and stolen away. The Era contained an account of a supposed wild being a few days ago who was seen in the locality of late, and it is now feared the loathsome wretch has spirited the child away to his lair in the hills. Major Adsid of the Bradford Oil Company ordered the men employed under his direction to prosecute the search until a clue is found somewhere. These, together with a large band of volunteer searchers, spent the night diligently seeking for the missing child. At a late hour, nothing had been heard from the missing one. Florence is a handsome child. She wore Friday a check gingham sailor suit. She has long brown curly hair, a round face, brown eyes, and rosy cheeks, and is stoutly built. Any information concerning her whereabouts will be joyfully received by the distracted parents. Then there's 2 updates. Rutherford, PA, July 20th. Florence, the little 2-year-old child of John Hughes, who has been missing from home since 10 o'clock this morning, has not been found, although there were at least 200 men and boys with torches and lanterns scouring the woods all evening. So far, the search has been fruitless. It is thought that she may have been carried away by the Wildmen, who has been seen by several in that locality recently. The parents are nearly frantic and earnestly request assistance to continue the search tomorrow morning. All who will kindly assist, please meet at J.T. Jones Boiler House, Rutherford Farm at 8 p.m. sharp. And then the last update is a party consisting of J.P. Taylor, Thomas Mills, and 2 members of the Era staff visited the Rutherford district at 2 o'clock this morning and learned that no trace had been found of the lost child. A heavy fog hung over the woods, and the search was abandoned until daylight.
Wow, yeah, that does read like a missing 411, doesn't it?
Yeah, yep.
It really falls into that strange vein. All right, Timothy Renner, our guest, will continue talking about these strange encounters through history of these Wildmen, gorilla, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call them. We'll discuss that and more. We'll be back. We've got more coming your way here on the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness.
Beyond the darkness.
Welcome back. This is the best in paranormal talk radio. Beyond the Darkness is on the air today. Bigfoot in Pennsylvania, a history of wildmen, gorillas, and other hairy monsters in the Keystone State. Timothy Renner is our guest. He is the author of this book, researcher of this book. It's fascinating, the type of stories you're able to dig up going that far back. And again, this is before all the hype of the Patterson-Gimlin film and the popularity of these creatures. But it seems like they've been around us and walking amongst us for as long as we've been recording news.
I think so. I think as long as we've been there, they've been kind of in the woods beside us.
Well, and you said that you just have to know the right names. You were talking to one guy, and what were you saying? You were talking to him about this, and he said there is no Bigfoot, but then went on to describe something to you?
Yeah, I have a list of names, alternate names for Bigfoot in Pennsylvania in the back of the book. The reason why is because, like I said, you kind of just have to know the name to call them. Like in the old days, it was Wildmen, even up into modern times. And this fellow said to me, "We don't have Bigfoot in Pennsylvania." And then he proceeded to tell me about big, hairy creatures that were 8 foot tall and stood on 2 legs, and he called them hodads.
Hodads? I've never heard that one before. Was that new to you?
Completely new to me. I'd never heard that.
Did you start looking back in history and see if you could find claims of these titles, of these different names?
I did, actually. I looked up several. There's the one reference is a gum devil. That's one that I could find, another sort of alternate name, but they're really just passing.
The gum devil?
Gum devil.
Where does that come from? Hodad, I can understand. It's kind of like, yeah, it's one of them big old hairy hodads. I understand that's kind of a weird little reference, but gum devil, where does that come from?
It was just a reference in Shippensburg, Pennsylvania. They said they used to scare kids with tales of the gum devil. And when the gorilla flap came through, there was an old timer there that said, "Oh, this is the gum devil. This is just like the gum devil." So obviously that's what they called him before.
So in that case, though, they were taking a weird creature that they'd already talked about in their folklore and then just attaching it to this kind of Bigfoot sighting.
I think so. I mean, the fellow, the old timer they were talking to said basically that was the same thing. Like 20 years before, whatever it was, they had the gum devil in town. And it was the same as these gorillas or something like that.
Can you tell me some of the other names that they've had for it? Were they referred to as Sasquatch in that area?
Not until, very recent times.
Okay.
There's been, the list of names I have is it's all over the place. I didn't really do them by time, but everything from Mowgli after the Call of the Wild became popular.
Okay.
In the 1800s, Mowgli's. Stone giants and stone coats, those came from Native Americans. Tree walkers, wooden face, and we get a little bit. You get the woolly buggers up here.
Right.
Mostly the boogers are down south. You get woolly buggers, and then the hide behind was one that you find up here, which is a English version of a Indian tale. They basically told people to be careful of the hide behind that stalks them in the forest, would peek behind trees and snatch people. A lot of, basically it's a Bigfoot creature by another name. And then you get the man apes, monster of the mountain, very sort of on the nose kind of names.
Right.
Well.
Generic basic names at that point. Were there other types of monsters? We talked about the gorilla possibilities and the Wildmen theories and the small. What did you said Pukwudgies is what some of the states refer to it. What did you call them again?
Albatwitch.
Albatwitch. Okay. And were there any other hairy creatures and beasts that you started to uncover in this research as well?
Well, we do get werewolf reports. Pennsylvania has a really kind of healthy folklore of werewolves due to the people from Germany and Switzerland that moved here, the kind of werewolf culture. But I kind of want to do another book on that, so I didn't put them in here. This one's all wild men, gorillas, and other things that are probably refer to Bigfoot creatures.
All right. Well, let's dip back into the historical accounts and hear some of your other favorite stories throughout the times of these large creatures and what they were doing.
This is a really wild one from 1895. Refers to a wild woman, and a lot of these wild woman reports, they don't say specifically why the person considered it a woman. Mm-hmm. Some of it has to do, I think, with the sort of the time period. And these are the Victorian and Edwardian times. A lot of times they'll throw clothes on them too. They'll say there's a big hairy guy and he wasn't wearing any clothes except for tattered pants. And I think that is probably they thought it was too risque to report on a naked man, or especially a naked woman running around the woods. I could be wrong. Maybe there were 8 foot tall, hairy people wearing clothes, but seems to me rather odd. But this one does not mention her wearing clothes. This is a wild woman report from 1895, Halstead, PA, August 2nd. Our inhabitants are terribly frightened over the appearance of a wild woman, said to be the wife of the wild man seen near Hancock, and many will not go out after dark. She was at Susquehanna on Friday evening after the men had quit work and went to a machine shop and removed with perfect ease a balance wheel. She mounted it and rode toward this place as easy as many can ride a bicycle. She was met near Smoky Hollow by a peddler on a horse. She dismounted from her balance wheel and possessed the same knack as the wild man did in dislocating the neck of the horse. With one jerk, she broke its neck.
Wow.
With a slight wave of her hand, she rendered the poor peddler unconscious. She then dragged the horse to the woods, where its bones were found today, showing that she had eaten the horse. The peddler recovered from his severe blow, and while sitting down thinking over his troubles, he heard 2 men coming in the darkness, and these proved to be Aaron Rinhart and Jason Melody, who gave the alarm. The wild woman was not pursued until morning, when a large crowd started in pursuit, and looking over the ground where she had last been seen, immense tracks were discovered, showing the size of her foot, the toes of which measured 6 inches and 1 in diameter. They followed the trail the best they could, and they got near Turkey Hill. They saw to their astonishment a pile of rattlesnake skins, showing that the creature eats snakes as well as horses. They returned on Saturday, but had not seen her. It is rumored she is in a cave near Mount Manitome, but no one dare go find out. Officers Higgins and Hogan say they will catch her yet if it is in their power. In an interview, the peddler today informed the correspondent that the woman was about 8.5 feet tall, and he thought weighed about 500 pounds. He said that instead of large sleeves, her arms were covered by a heavy growth of hair, which, he said, would be the style in a few years.
Even taking shots back then, huh?
Yeah.
Wow, but with one clean jerk able to break the neck of a horse.
Yeah, and apparently I couldn't find the other article. Hancock, I think, is in Maryland. I think that's in Western Maryland. I couldn't find the article that refers to the wild man, but apparently he broke a horse's neck as well, because they said she did the same thing he did. So that's pretty incredible.
They are one unhappy and horse-hungry family out there.
I guess so.
Okay.
Yeah.
The wild women. Do you have any other weird wild woman accounts?
Yeah. There's the wild woman again. This is 1891 from Womelsdorf. The wild woman who roamed over South Mountain near this place years ago is reported to have made her appearance again. One of the party from this place, while picking huckleberries, says he saw her. While going through a ravine, he said, our attention was drawn to a peculiar noise on the incline above. We ventured near the spot and saw to our amazement an object in an almost nude condition, long hair grown over its face and body, and one arm and one leg shorter than the other. It was hanging on a vine suspended from a large tree, swinging to and fro as if humming a lullaby. Upon seeing us, it leaped from tree to tree and was soon out of sight, chattering to itself as it disappeared. The affair is called considerable talk here, and the matter will be further investigated.
The idea that these creatures are around, and you've got many different cultures that are around Pennsylvania. Were you able to find anything from the Native American culture on what they believe they're dealing with? Do they think these are animals? Do they believe that they're just another race of humans? What do they think?
It really varies, and unfortunately, there weren't a lot of Native Americans in Pennsylvania by the late 1800s. Honestly, we had broken up the Susquehanna Indians, for instance, very early on. They had a very strong tradition of the albatwitch creatures, the little creatures. They had them on their shield, and they talked about them as being very fierce, even though they were small, very, very fierce and mean. The other tribes, they tend to, it varies from tribe to tribe. A lot of them do consider them to be either wild Indians or, like I said, stone giants. Some of them will call them stone giants and so forth. It depends on the tribe.
All right. Did they, any of the indigenous peoples at that time, though, did they leave behind cave paintings, anything else that might kind of lead us to believe that these creatures have been around since their time as well?
Well, other than like I said, the Susquehannock Indians, we have some war shields left from them with paintings of the albatwitch on them, and there are some petroglyphs which it's up to interpretation, may or may not show creatures. I think depends who you ask. If you ask a Bigfoot guy, they show Bigfoot. If you ask someone else, they say, nah, it's just a depiction of a man.
Okay, all right. And what about the Amish culture out there? Do they have encounters with these creatures? I mean, they're certainly kind of off the grid from us. Do they have reports that they talk about?
There's references to the Dutch having a superstition of what they call the hairy man, and the newspapers call it a superstition. And they say it haunts them. They didn't specifically mention the Amish, but they mentioned the Pennsylvania Dutch. The Amish reports are very scarce, even into modern times. There's been a few. There's a really odd one that happened over the course of, I think, 3 days in the 1970s. That's in my other book, but that details a sort of a creature that may or may not have been a Bigfoot. Some people say it's a goat man. It was reported to have horns that went from farm to farm over the course of 3 days. But there's really not a ton of accounts, and I just don't know if it's if the Amish culture just keeps a little more quiet, more to themselves, or if maybe they're just not going out at night. I don't know.
Right. Or, well, I know in a lot of cases they're superstitious of these beings, and the more attention you give to them or speak of them, they're afraid that it might draw them to you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. Yeah. So we're still in the 1800s, and I think you've dabbled a couple times into the 1900s. What about starting to get into maybe a more refined culture area when we start looking at times when maybe we wouldn't have been so easily fooled or tricked by things out in the woods? What kind of accounts have you got maybe from the last 100 years?
Well, I stop at 1920 just because.
You do? Okay.
Yeah. I wanted to kind of get the old reports. But 1920, like I said, is that real kind of well-documented wave of gorilla sightings across the state. And the report I gave before about the creature attacking the boy, just a few days later, there's a story of a gorilla attacking a car. They call them autoists. This would have been 1920, December 18th. News stories concerning the mysterious animal that looks like a gorilla and makes a noise like a horse, which has been seen in the lower end of Snyder County during the past month, are in circulation every hour of the day there, and the tale of an alleged attack upon an autoist south of Selinsgrove is today's best tale. The gorilla, or whatever the animal terror may turn out to be, leaped upon an autoist traveling towards Selinsgrove. So the story goes, and he would no doubt have been badly done up, but for his resistance with a small penknife, which was the only weapon at hand. When the fight was at its height, according to the story, another autoist came along and joined in the fray, the two automobile drivers succeeding in beating off the animal's attack. Exhaustive investigation failed to reveal the names of the autoists or other particulars of the incident. But that's just a couple days after the animal supposedly attacked the boy on the farm. So whatever this was, it was rather aggressive.
And isn't it strange, though, that they have two encounters like this so close? And then do they ever pick up on it again? Is it ever revisited? Is it seen throughout the area, or was that the last time they dealt with the creature?
Oh no, like I said, you can sort of track it almost from paper to paper across the state. If it's one creature, it was probably more than one. Well, I do think it was more than one. Most of the reports say it's 7 foot tall, which, by the way, the tallest mountain gorilla ever measured was 6'4", I believe. So a 7 foot tall creature is outside the realm of a mountain gorilla. Once again, kind of canceling out the idea that it was escaped from a zoo. But it's last seen in Gettysburg in Pennsylvania in 1921. It's kind of the end of 1920. It makes its way 1921 kind of across the state. I say it. I think, like I said, it was probably a group of creatures. And then I actually found a report in Maryland. That's 2 months after the Gettysburg report. So it seems like it moved south.
Well, what did it say? I mean, Gettysburg, that's a pretty historic location, and people are always out and around there. What was the encounter they had there?
This was on York Street in Gettysburg, which is pretty much the main street. That's the main way in to Gettysburg. At the time, it would have been, even at the time in 1921, would have been fairly well traveled. And it says it's in again. That's a reference to the gorilla that people have been seeing over and over again. It's in again. After having passed out of the limelight several months ago, the well-known gorilla is back. It was in Gettysburg several nights ago, according to information from well-informed circles. It was not only seen, but shot at. Whether or not it was wounded is not known, but it departed hurriedly from Lower York Street in the direction of Biglerville. Not long ago, a woman residing on York Street saw a strange object about 4 feet high moving along the fence in rear of her house, it is said, and being alone, she rushed to the place next door seeking help. The man of the house secured a shotgun. He too saw the beast. He fired. The gorilla dropped to the ground. Thinking he had bagged the game, the hunter went to the fallen animal. When only a few feet away, the beast jumped up to its hind legs and chased the man into his house, residents of that part of town declare. Those who ventured to look out say the animal disappeared in the direction of Biglerville. In fact, they declare an examination of the ground in a field nearby revealed footprints of a strange beast. A number of York Street residents have oiled shotguns long obscured, and a second visit by the beast to that part of town would probably result fatally for it. Others believe the animal by this time has returned to the fastness of the mountains.
And then you said that you're able to track it. How long before it shows itself in Maryland?
It's about 2 months later, I believe. That was August 9th. Yeah, at the end of October, it's in Maryland.
And were newspapers picking up the story back then? Would somebody write about it in Gettysburg and then they would pick it up and carry it in Maryland or carry it in Washington? Was there anything like that, or was it usually just stuck in that region?
A little bit. You'll see that, and usually those. Excuse me. Usually those, like I said, are the reports where another paper will say, the people in Gettysburg must be drinking moonshine or something like this. They're seeing gorillas. But then the papers that are local to the areas tend to report them more serious.
All right. And with the one, when it finally made its way into Maryland, was there anything that led you to believe that it was at least one of the same pack? Specifically, what about it made you realize that this is probably of that same group?
It just seems like maybe they headed in that direction. I'm not basing it on anything other than the reports in Pennsylvania stop and here one in Maryland pops up. So, 2 months later, this whole wave seems to have stopped across Pennsylvania, and then here's a gorilla in the woods of Maryland. It just seemed a little too coincidental.
All right. The idea that you've got all of these great stories that you're able to find, and how long does it take you to put together a book like this and do that research to find all of these different stories?
The research it's pretty much a full-time job. I spend a lot of time with my nose in different searches. I'll go to historical societies. I'll hit microfilm. I'll do internet searches. It's and you have to be pretty obsessive to get enough, which thankfully I am. I'm a completist in all things, so I try to find. In fact, I found a report. I'm going on after Pennsylvania. I'm going to do other areas I've already started. I didn't think I'd have enough to fill a whole book for Pennsylvania. I was going to do a book for the entire United States, but it became clear very quickly that I'd have enough for just to put Pennsylvania in the book by itself. But
how many accounts do you have throughout that entire book?
Oh, I didn't count them. It's 200 pages, and so there's plenty. I do them. Some chapters have 50, some accounts, some might have just 4 or 5. I do it chronologically. So the older reports are a little more sparse, and then as you get it up into the 1900s, some of those chapters have 50 or more accounts per chapter.
The stories that you're collecting now, if people have come across stories from their areas, do you want them to send those in to you?
Oh, I'd love it. Yeah, absolutely.
Are you still finding more accounts in just Pennsylvania alone?
Yeah, I am. That's as I'm going into these other states, a lot of times you'll find, I found a great report from a newspaper in another state of a Pennsylvania sighting that, I couldn't, it's too late. I just found it the other day. The book's already done. Oh. So, yeah. So, and being the completist, it's, I'm stomping my feet over that.
Well, that's why you always come up with the addendum book with new research, new stories, right?
Right, yeah.
Do you remember what that story was off the top of your head? The one that you came across from another state reporting about what was going on?
It had to do with Welsh Mountain, which is an area that, it's interesting. That's an area in the 1800s, late 1800s. There's repeated sightings. And every year they'll talk about this wild man coming back. So this was a story of one of the wild men from the Welsh Mountain, and they said it was had some fiery eyes, I believe. It's very interesting, but it was another in that series.
All right. Now, you talked a little bit about, and I know you're looking at doing a book on the werewolf. Yeah, that intrigues me, and I know to kind of whet people's appetite for that book that you're going to be doing in the future as well. Is this just part of the folklore of the people that brought it over from the old country, or was there a real belief that these creatures did exist and roam the countryside?
I think it was probably mostly the folklore that came with people. Now, I mean, there are these dogman sightings that even happen today. I've had people contact me with sightings, in Pennsylvania of these creatures. I don't know what we're talking about. I think my gut feeling is in the past when people saw maybe a Bigfoot creature, if they came from a culture with werewolves, they might have said, oh, I saw a werewolf, because they wouldn't, in the 1800s, you wouldn't be familiar probably with a Bigfoot creature. If you see something big and hairy, and upright walking, you might, if you came from, a country with a strong werewolf folklore, you might assume that's a werewolf and not a Bigfoot creature. Likewise, I think today some of these dogman sightings might be Bigfoot and vice versa. Some Bigfoot sightings might be dogman. It's hard to say.
Well, and how do you draw the division line between a dogman and a wolfman? I mean, it's a large bipedal canine-like creature. Is there really any difference between these things?
I don't think so. I think dogman is kind of the hot now name for what we called, werewolves before. People make the distinction that a werewolf is technically a human that has transformed into a beast, while I guess a dogman is always a dogman. It doesn't, transform.
That's fascinating to me. Yeah, just what a strange world we live in, and mysterious with all of these possible things that surround us on a daily basis that most of us go a lifetime without ever encountering or knowing about, yet there are others that are seeing these in multiple days in multiple ways.
Yeah. I've met people who, I met a fellow, a really nice guy, and he started telling me about all these Bigfoot reports, and honestly, I kind of thought, well, this is one of those guys that sees a Bigfoot behind every bush, I'm not sure if I'm going to believe this guy. And then I went out with him, and every time I go out with him, something freaky happens every time I go out with this guy. So he's turned me, at least maybe not into a believer in Bigfoot, but certainly a believer in him.
Okay. Well, when you say that you've had freaky things happen every time you're with him, like what type of things? Is that what you were talking about earlier? The clacking, the whoops, the wood banging, and the rocks being thrown at you? No,
with him, for instance, he took me out to an area. It was the area I wrote about in my first book. And he said, I want to show you something. And he took me, and there was a huge stick, what they call a stick formation or a tree formation. It was a big X but the roots were up. So whatever put this there had to be very strong. I mean, these were like big trees, like 12-inch around trees with the root balls up. So mounted in this X formation, I couldn't see how they would have fallen that way naturally. It just seemed unbelievably. The same day I was with him and his girlfriend was there. I was talking to him. His girlfriend said, I hear a huffing sound. I heard a huffing sound across the creek. And sure enough, I kind of went down and looked in that area, and there was a big white sycamore tree. There was no other trees were blowing, and one tree is just rocking back and forth. I couldn't explain that at all. Now, a lot of these kind of stone throwing and these weird things where you don't see a creature. A friend of mine, Joshua Cutchin, he's writes a lot of paranormal books. He said to me, don't you think this stuff sounds an awful lot like poltergeist activity? And that's really sort of shifted my thought on those kind of things, the stone throwing, the kind of encounters where someone doesn't see a creature. So I don't know that we're necessarily talking about Bigfoot encounters when you don't see a creature, but you experience stone throwing or disembodied screams or even odd smells. These are all things that go along with hauntings as well.
Yeah, and I know there's some, Dana and Greg Newkirk have been really kind of pushing the agenda that some of these things, these creatures just may be that, ghosts, that these large bipedal furry beasts might be nothing more than supernatural passings of what what once walked the earth and what was indigenous to that area.
Literally, I mean, almost any theory at this point is as valid as any other, and I won't say no to anything. I mean, there's some. I personally don't believe Bigfoot are being dropped here by flying saucers, even though you tend to get UFO reports in the same places as Bigfoot reports. But if it proves, someone one day could prove that they're walking out of flying saucers, and I know some people have reported that. I wouldn't be terribly astounded. The same with the ghost theory. If there was some way to prove that these were simply, ghosts of some relict hominid or even manifestations of like a tulpa-like thing that we were manifesting ourselves through belief or sort of archetypal Jungian kind of things, I wouldn't be surprised by that either. I don't have a real hard explanation, and until it's proven, I kind of leave everything as a possibility.
Well, I can't thank you enough, Timothy. Thank you for joining us again and sharing your great accounts. And again, pick up the copy of the book, folks. Bigfoot in Pennsylvania, A History of Wildmen, Gorillas, and Other Hairy Monsters in the Keystone State. You can find more information about our guest at darkhollerarts.com. We'll have a link up for that as well, so you can follow along. But make sure you pick up a copy of the book and read some more of these fascinating encounters and historic accounts about our favorite bipedal walking 8-foot and larger hominid, Bigfoot. It's just fascinating stuff. Tomorrow we're back. Nate and Kaylee Ratterman are our guests. The Museum of Shadows in Elmwood, Nebraska. We'll talk about the haunted artifacts and objects that they have in their building, how they acquired them, what type of activity has taken place, and we'll do that tomorrow. And remember, if you've missed True Crime Tuesday this past week, Deadly Voices, Chris Swinney, our guest, serial killer Herbert Mullen terrorized the Santa Cruz, California area at the same time the infamous co-ed killer Edmund Kemper did, and killed in that area. It is a fascinating story of two killers that were not happy that each other was in the same territory. You've got to hear the story to believe it. And if you missed any part of that and haven't heard it yet or haven't subscribed, you can catch a small snippet from that episode at the end of our Tuesday Beyond the Darkness. So just go download Tuesdays Beyond the Darkness and give it a listen. Right at the end, you'll be able to hear a snippet from that episode. And if you'd like to subscribe and become a True Crime Tuesday member, all you have to do is go to darknessradio.com. and then click on the True Crime Tuesday tab, the button there. You'll see the image. Click on it. It'll take you right to the Patreon page. You can sign up for just $5 a month. That's only $1.25 an episode. You can't get that kind of entertainment for that inexpensive. $1.25 for a 90 to 120 minute episode filled with the best in true crime talk radio. Plus, you get brand new dumb crime, stupid criminals delivered every week. So check it out for yourself. And remember, we've still got a few tickets that remain for our haunted tour and excursion to England that's going to be taking place in August. We'd love for you to join us. It's going to be amazing. We've got so much lined up for you. You get to investigate a couple of places. We get to visit haunted and historic locations following in the footsteps of Jack the Ripper, Bram Stoker's Dracula. We'll also get to visit Nottingham and Sherwood Forest. You get to hear some of the most rich and amazing history. And Neil Story will be our guide on this trip. You can find out more by visiting darknessevents.com. That's darknessevents.com. You can find out about our London trip or any of the other ways that you can meet up with Tim and I throughout the year. That's it for tonight. You've been listening to the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness.